Depression isn't what kills you. It's the lie you tell yourself about why you're depressed. Viktor Frankl spent 3 years in Nazi concentration camps, watching some prisoners collapse into despair, while others, in identical conditions, maintained psychological resilience. What he discovered wasn't about positive thinking or chemical imbalances. It was about a fundamental error in how we understand our own suffering. Most people today treat depression as a problem to eliminate, but Frankl revealed it as a message we're refusing to hear. We medicate symptoms while ignoring what our psyche is desperately trying to communicate, that we're living in profound contradiction to what gives human existence meaning. The uncomfortable truth Frankl uncovered is that much of modern depression isn't a malfunction. It's a healthy response to a meaningless life. Your depression might be the sanest thing about you. What would change if you stopped trying to fix your depression and started listening to what it's telling you about how you're living? Share in the comments. Have you ever considered that your depression might be trying to show you something important about your life's direction? Viktor Frankl noticed something that disturbed him deeply during his years practicing psychiatry in Vienna, something that would later be confirmed in the most horrific laboratory imaginable, the Nazi death camps. He observed that people living in objectively comfortable circumstances often suffered profound depression, while some people enduring unimaginable suffering maintained psychological vitality. This wasn't about resilience in the way we typically understand it. This was about something far more fundamental to human nature. In his clinical practice before the war, Frankl encountered successful professionals, people with loving families, individuals who by every external measure should have been content. Yet they came to him with a specific kind of despair he began calling the existential vacuum. They described their lives as empty, meaningless, hollow. They had everything and felt nothing. They were depressed, not because something was wrong with their brain chemistry, but because something was wrong with how they were living. Then came Auschwitz, Dachau, and the other camps. Frankl lost his wife, his parents, his brother, his life's work. He was stripped of everything except his naked existence, and in that hell he witnessed the same pattern but inverted. Some prisoners, faced with identical horrors, collapsed into what he called delusion of reprieve, or gave up entirely. But others, inexplicably, maintained what he described as spiritual freedom even when every external freedom was taken. The difference wasn't optimism or strength of will, it was whether they had maintained connection to meaning. Here's what Frankl realized that revolutionized his understanding of human psychology. Depression is often not a disease to be cured, but a signal to be interpreted. When we experience that crushing emptiness, that sense that nothing matters, that life has become unbearable, our psyche isn't malfunctioning. It's functioning exactly as it should. It's screaming at us that we're living in a way that violates our fundamental need for meaning. Think about physical pain for a moment. When you touch a hot stove, pain isn't the problem, it's the solution. It's your body's emergency alert system telling you to move your hand before you suffer permanent damage. We don't treat pain as the enemy, we treat it as crucial information. But when it comes to psychological pain, we've made a catastrophic category error. We treat depression as the problem itself, rather than as information about a problem. Frankl developed what he called logotherapy based on this insight. The word comes from the Greek logos, meaning not just logic, but meaning or purpose. His central claim was radical. The primary drive in human beings isn't pleasure, as Freud believed, or power, as Adler suggested, but meaning. We can endure almost any suffering if we understand why we're suffering, but we cannot endure a meaningless existence, even if it's comfortable. This is why so many people today are depressed despite living in unprecedented material comfort. We've optimized for pleasure, for comfort, for the elimination of suffering. But we've failed to optimize for meaning. We've created lives that are safe and empty, comfortable and hollow, and our psyche rebels against this. Depression, in many cases, is that rebellion. Frankl made a distinction that most people miss. There's a difference between suffering that has meaning and suffering that doesn't. In the camps, prisoners who had a reason to survive, a loved one waiting for them, important work left unfinished, a mission that required their existence, were more likely to endure. Not because their suffering was less, but because their suffering had context within a meaningful narrative. Meanwhile, people today often suffer without any redemptive meaning. They're depressed because they went to the job they hate, came home to the relationship that feels empty, and pursued the goals that society told them to want, but that their soul finds meaningless. The existential vacuum that Frankl identified has only intensified in modern life. We live in a culture that has systematically dismantled traditional sources of meaning: religion, community, clear social roles, connection to something transcendent, without replacing them with anything substantial. We are told that meaning is subjective, that we can create our own purpose, that happiness is the goal, but this radical individualism leaves us unmoored. We're free to choose our meaning, but we have no framework for making that choice. So we default to what advertising and culture tell us to want: status, pleasure, comfort, achievement. And here's the truly disturbing part that Frankl understood: you can achieve all of those things and still be profoundly depressed. In fact, achieving them often intensifies the depression, because you've invested years or decades pursuing goals that you discover, upon reaching them, were never actually meaningful to you. You climbed the ladder only to discover it was leaning against the wrong wall. The depression that follows isn't a chemical imbalance. It's an appropriate response to the recognition that you've wasted your one precious life on pursuits that don't actually matter to your deepest self. Frankl called this the existential frustration. It's what happens when our will to meaning is blocked or denied. We might try to fill the vacuum with pleasure-seeking, what he called the pleasure principle run amok. We binge-watch television, scroll endlessly through social media, pursue sexual conquests, buy things we don't need. We're trying to fill an existential void with experiential content, and it never works. The emptiness remains because the emptiness isn't asking for more experiences, it's asking for meaning. Or we might try to fill it with power and achievement, climbing career ladders, accumulating wealth, seeking status and recognition. This works slightly better than pure pleasure-seeking because achievement can connect to meaning, but only if the achievement itself is meaningful. If you're achieving things you don't actually care about, if you're succeeding at a game you never wanted to play, the existential vacuum remains untouched beneath all your trophies. Let me be very direct about what Frankl discovered. Most people are living lives they were never meant to live. Not in some mystical, predestined sense, but in the sense that they've adopted goals, values, and purposes from external sources: family expectations, cultural programming, peer pressure, advertising, rather than discovering what their unique existence is actually calling them toward. And depression is often the psychological consequence of this disconnection. This is why antidepressants, while they can be helpful and sometimes necessary, often don't fully resolve depression. They can adjust neurotransmitter levels, but they can't give your life meaning. They can make you feel less terrible about a meaningless existence, but they can't make that existence meaningful. If your depression is rooted in existential emptiness rather than pure biochemistry, medication might numb the signal, but it won't address the underlying issue your psyche is trying to communicate. Frankl wasn't anti-medication. He was a psychiatrist who understood biological factors in mental health. But he insisted that we must distinguish between psychogenic neuroses, which arise from psychological conflicts, and noogenic neuroses, which arise from spiritual or existential problems. Many people today are suffering from noogenic depression that originates in the absence of meaning, but treating it as if it were purely biochemical. The question Frankl forces us to confront is uncomfortable. What if your depression is actually the healthiest thing about you? What if it's the part of your psyche that refuses to accept a hollow existence? What if it's your soul's last defense against a life of quiet desperation? Consider how you spend your days, not how you wish you spent them, or how you tell people you spend them, but how you actually spend them. Are you doing work that feels meaningful to you, or are you trading hours of your finite life for money to buy things that don't bring lasting satisfaction? Are you in relationships that nourish your soul, or are you maintaining connections out of habit, fear, or social expectation? Are you pursuing goals that genuinely matter to you, or are you chasing achievements that you think are supposed to matter? Frankl believed that meaning cannot be given or created arbitrarily. It must be discovered. Each person has a unique meaning to their existence, what he called their existential task. This isn't about finding some grand cosmic purpose written in the stars. It's about recognizing that in each moment, life is asking something specific of you. The question isn't what you want from life, but what life wants from you. This is a radical inversion of how most people approach existence. We typically think about what we can get, what experiences we can accumulate, what pleasures we can enjoy, what achievements we can obtain. But Frankl insisted that meaning comes not from getting, but from giving, from responding to the specific demands that life places before us. The depressed person often asks why they should keep living. Frankl's response would be, stop asking what life owes you, and start asking what you owe life. He identified 3 primary ways we discover meaning. The first is through creating something or doing something significant, through work, through art, through contribution. But this only generates meaning if the work itself is genuinely meaningful to you, not just economically rewarding or socially impressive. The second is through experiencing something or encountering someone, through love, through beauty, through connection. Depression often involves the closing off of this capacity, becoming so trapped in our own suffering that we can't open to genuine encounter with others or with beauty. The third, and perhaps most profound, is through the attitude we take toward unavoidable suffering. This last category is crucial because it means that even when life has taken everything from us, when we're facing circumstances we cannot change, we still have the ultimate human freedom, the freedom to choose our attitude toward those circumstances. Frankl witnessed prisoners in the camps who maintained their humanity, who shared their last piece of bread, who offered comfort to others despite their own agony. They had discovered that meaning is possible even in, and sometimes especially in, the depths of suffering. But here's what most people miss about Frankl's message. He wasn't saying that suffering itself is meaningful or that we should seek suffering. He was saying that when suffering is unavoidable, we can choose to suffer meaningfully rather than meaninglessly. The key word is unavoidable. Much of our suffering today is avoidable. We're suffering because we've constructed lives that violate our need for meaning. And that kind of suffering, self-imposed existential suffering, doesn't become meaningful just by enduring it. It becomes meaningful only when we have the courage to recognize it for what it is and make the changes necessary to live differently. This is where depression becomes a profound teacher if we're willing to listen. When you feel that crushing emptiness, that sense that nothing matters, your psyche is giving you crucial information. Something about how you're living is fundamentally wrong. Not morally wrong necessarily, but wrong for you, wrong for what your unique existence requires to flourish. The tragedy is that most people, when faced with this signal, do everything they can to silence it rather than listen to it. They increase their medication dosage, distract themselves with more entertainment, work longer hours to avoid being alone with their thoughts, drink or use drugs to numb the emptiness, or simply try to white-knuckle their way through an existence they find unbearable. These strategies might provide temporary relief, but they don't address the core issue. They're like removing the battery from a smoke alarm because the sound is annoying, all while the house continues to burn. Frankl would invite you to do something radically different. Stop trying to eliminate your depression and start interrogating it. What is it telling you? What aspects of your life feel hollow or meaningless? Where have you compromised your deepest values for comfort or approval? What are you avoiding that you know you need to confront? What calling are you ignoring because it seems impractical or frightening? These are not comfortable questions. Answering them honestly might require you to make significant changes. Leaving a career you've invested years in, ending a relationship that looks good on paper but feels dead inside, admitting that you've been living someone else's idea of a good life rather than discovering your own. This is why many people prefer to see depression as a purely biological malfunction. That narrative allows you to keep living the same life while hoping that medication will make you feel better about it. But Frankl's approach demands more. It demands that you take responsibility not for causing your depression, that's often not within your control, but for responding to what your depression is revealing. It demands that you stop asking why you're depressed and start asking what your depression is showing you about the gap between how you're living and how you need to live to experience your existence as meaningful. Here's the part that nobody wants to hear. Discovering and living a meaningful life is often harder than living a comfortable, conventional one. Meaning frequently requires sacrifice. It might mean less money, less security, less approval from others. It might mean facing fears you've spent years avoiding. It might mean disappointing people you care about. It might mean admitting you've been wrong about fundamental life choices. But here's what Frankl knew from the darkest possible circumstances. A meaningful, hard life is psychologically sustainable in a way that a meaningless, comfortable life never can be. We can endure tremendous difficulty if we understand why we're enduring it. But we cannot endure, at least not without deep psychological suffering, a life that feels fundamentally empty, even if it's superficially pleasant. Before we conclude, I want to emphasize something important. These insights are meant for inspiration and reflection, not as a replacement for professional mental health support. If you're struggling with depression, particularly if you're having thoughts of harming yourself, please reach out to a qualified psychologist or psychiatrist. There's no weakness in seeking help. It's actually a profound act of taking responsibility for your well-being. Professional support can provide you with tools, perspectives, and sometimes medical interventions that can make your journey toward meaning more possible. This video explores philosophical and existential dimensions of depression, but it doesn't replace the personalized care that a mental health professional can offer. So here's what Frankl forces you to confront. Your depression might not be the problem. Your depression might be pointing you toward the problem. The real question isn't how to eliminate the depression, but how to live a life meaningful enough that depression loses its grip because you're finally aligned with what your existence requires. Are you living the life your soul needs, or the life that looks good from the outside? Are you pursuing meaning, or are you pursuing what you've been told should be meaningful? Have you discovered your existential task, or are you still performing someone else's script? And perhaps most importantly, if you eliminated your depression tomorrow without changing anything else about your life, would you actually want to keep living the way you're living? These questions don't have easy answers. They might not have immediate answers at all, but they're the questions that Frankl believed we must face if we want to understand why we're depressed and what to do about it. Not what medication to take, though that might be part of the solution, but what life to live, what meaning to discover, what purpose to serve with the limited time we have. Your depression isn't lying to you. It's telling you a truth you don't want to hear, that you've constructed a life that violates your fundamental need for meaning. The question is whether you have the courage to listen, to change, to discover what your unique existence is calling you toward. Because on the other side of that courage isn't just the absence of depression, it's the presence of meaning. And meaning, Frankl discovered, is what makes a human life worth living, even when, especially when, that life is difficult. What will you do with this information? Will you medicate the signal and continue living as you have been? Or will you have the courage to ask what your depression is trying to teach you about who you need to become and how you need to live? The choice, as Frankl would remind you, is the last human freedom that can never be taken away.